Vivica Fox.
Vivica, what would it take for you and 50 Cent to...
Dating 50 Cent, I mean, was difficult. He is absolutely the love of my life because I really, really cared for him and I loved him very, very much.
She goes to go do some publicity for it. What do you say about 50 Cent saying Empire ratings are going down because it's gay?
Seems like he's got something that's not quite clear. So there was a vibe cover with him and Soulja Boy that made me kind of go,
BuzzBuster welcomes you inside the glittering yet volatile world of celebrity power and music industry empires, where everything can change in an instant. One day, a star is untouchable, surrounded by wealth, influence, and the kind of cultural gravity that takes decades to build. The teams behind them are vast, the publicists relentless, the business managers calculating, and the legal muscle formidable. Celebrities at that tier are not simply famous, they are institutions. They generate revenue streams that flow in every direction. They sponsor brands, launch labels, influence fashion, and shape the cultural conversation in ways that ordinary people can barely imagine. Their names carry market value. Their opinions move markets. Their silence or their speech can shift the mood of an entire industry overnight. The next, a single controversy can send shockwaves through headlines around the world and throw an entire brand into turmoil so severe that even the most loyal insiders begin to distance themselves.
Don't date rappers, don't date 50 Cent. You know, where did that come from? Like,
I was asked a question that, as a 17-year-old, what would I tell myself? So it's just a pre-warning for my young girls. Here you go, sweetheart.
Thank you so much.
Happy holidays. To be careful, to watch who you date.
Right.
You know what I mean? You're free to date whoever you want. But, you know, for myself, I would just be careful. Maybe not go public so fast and just have fun.
It does not always take something criminal or confirmed. Sometimes a rumor is enough. Sometimes a whisper repeated by the right person in the right room is enough to start a chain reaction that no team of lawyers or communications experts can fully contain. The machine that built the celebrity can, under the right conditions, become the very engine that undoes them. And when it turns without mercy and without patience for nuance.
That is the nature of the entertainment industry at its most powerful and its most dangerous. It built legends with the same hands it uses to dismantle them. It rewards boldness until boldness becomes liability. It celebrates visibility until visibility becomes exposure. The same cameras that captured years of triumph can, in an instant, become instruments of accountability or instruments of destruction, depending entirely on what they capture and who decides to share it.
I'm enjoying myself. This is a big change in my life. I'm just happy to be present with all of these beautiful people in here. You know, I want to thank Vivica Fox for wearing that dress
too. For anyone who has built a career in that world, that reality never fully leaves the back of the mind. It simply waits. That is exactly the kind of storm people began watching when 50 Cent and Diddy found themselves linked to a fast-growing scandal that seemed to gather force with every passing hour. Two of the biggest names in music suddenly became central figures in a story that felt larger by the hour, not just because of who they were, but because of everything their names represented. These were not fringe players or minor celebrities on the edge of relevance. These were architects of modern hip-hop culture. Men whose influence stretched from recording studios in New York to boardrooms in Los Angeles, from fashion runways to film sets, from alcohol empires to clothing lines that generated hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Their names were not just famous, they were embedded into the cultural fabric of the past 3 decades in ways that made the stakes of any scandal involving them feel genuinely enormous.
What started as industry drama quickly turned into a full-scale media obsession, with public curiosity rising as every new development pushed the story further into the spotlight. The entertainment world had seen clashes before. Celebrity feuds, leaked conversations, disputed business dealings, public fallouts between artists. None of that was new. But something about this particular storm felt different from the beginning. It had texture that other stories lacked. It had history stretching back years and touching multiple lives. It had enough moving parts to keep even the most skeptical observers paying close attention, because every time someone tried to reduce it to a simple explanation,
another layer appeared that complicated everything they thought they understood.
Y'all know that Diddy tried to scare 50 Cent after the documentary he made on him. You see, after Diddy got sent to jail, 50 Cent dropped a documentary exposing him for all the horrible things he did, and everyone watched it.
Are you watching the documentary on
Hey, bro.
How crazy is it?
Yo, he's horrible.
Bro, he allegedly Pac and Biggie.
Bro, both of them.
But even though Diddy was in jail, he found out about it and sent flowers to 50 Cent, which is a known death threat message. But he forgot who he was dealing with, because 50 Cent is the scariest gangster alive who took 9 bullets and felt nothing.
The early days of the scandal were characterized by the particular kind of chaos that lives in the space between confirmed fact and unverified rumor. Nobody knew exactly what was true. Nobody was willing to say definitively what was false. The people at the center were not speaking. The people adjacent to them were speaking carefully in coded language that could be interpreted in multiple ways. And into that vacuum rushed something enormous and insatiable, the combined curiosity of millions of people with social media accounts, opinions, and an appetite for drama that celebrity culture had spent decades cultivating, and that was now turned on the very people who had benefited from it most. Just when it seemed the situation could not get any more surprising, another name surfaced and completely changed the tone of the conversation. Vivica A, the veteran actress known for memorable work in both film and television, unexpectedly became part of the narrative in a way that nobody had predicted or anticipated. Her connection to the situation caught many people off guard, including people who thought they had a firm grasp on the story and its principal characters. She was not a name most people had been expecting to see in this context, and that alone was enough to send speculation soaring in entirely new directions.
Bianca was watching because she decided it was finally time to pull back the curtain on Kanye's dark, nasty secrets too. She exposed Kanye's alleged connection to Diddy's freak-offs. People were disgusted, but let's be real, not exactly shocked. Because if you've been keeping up, Kanye's been doing the most lately, even defending Diddy while the rest of the world is watching that man crash and burn.
Because of that unexpected development, the controversy took on a new layer of intrigue, giving audiences and commentators even more to talk about at a moment when they were already drowning in material. Her presence in the story introduced questions that had not previously been asked. It opened doors that had been closed. It complicated a narrative that some had assumed was relatively contained. And it reminded everyone watching that this kind of story rarely stays neatly within the boundaries that observers try to draw around it. Real life is messier than that. Real scandals have unexpected participants. And the moment another name appeared, the entire structure of the conversation shifted in ways that nobody could immediately map or predict.
Naturally, that unexpected link triggered a wave of speculation that refused to slow down regardless of how much time passed. Fans, media outlets, and industry watchers all tried to piece together how her name fit into a scandal already packed with tension and unresolved questions. With each passing day, interest only grew stronger, fed by new fragments of information that arrived unevenly and without clear context.
He would do a lot of foul shit, like behind the scenes. He would do some foul shit, like hating on, like doing things with people I done business with that he done business with. He would say shit that I was like, he said that to you?
Right.
Like, yeah, I said, all right. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, and niggas don't know what they like till they see somebody with it. So they want the girls after you done with them and shit.
Yeah, leftovers.
Yeah.
Take your leftovers. A lot of niggas have my leftovers.
The story no longer felt like a simple clash between two music giants who had history between them. Instead, it started to resemble a much bigger puzzle, one with several moving parts and multiple storylines intersecting without warning, running through different corners of the entertainment world and touching people whose connections to one another had never previously been examined or understood. The dimensions of that puzzle kept expanding. People who had been watching casually at the beginning found themselves drawn deeper into the details as the weeks went on, because each new piece of information seemed to make the picture simultaneously clearer and more confusing. Answers generated new questions. Confirmations opened new avenues of speculation. The story was not moving toward resolution, it was moving toward greater complexity, and the audience's appetite for that complexity only seemed to grow the more it was fed.
What made the situation even more striking was the completely different way that two music figures appeared to respond to the growing pressure surrounding them. On one side, 50 Cent delivered a reaction that many saw as fiery, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. His approach added heat to an already explosive situation and kept public attention locked in place with the kind of precision that comes from someone who has spent years understanding exactly how media attention works and how to direct it.
One person who was always anti-Diddy and was always speaking about Diddy as a problematic person was 50 Cent. And it turns out that it's just been announced that he's created a docu-series on Netflix. I can't wait to see this. The other end of that, every person who has tried to speak out about this, who has tried to speak out about the industry, the type of people that are controlling the industry, the attacks that people face from the media if they try to speak out, is always the same. They're called crazy.
Every response seemed to raise the temperature just a little more, as if he was deliberately feeding the flames rather than trying to contain them, as if he had made a calculated decision that engagement served his interests better than retreat. That kind of energy is nearly impossible to look away from, and the public did not look away. His posts were sharp, his tone was confrontational, the language he chose did not hedge or soften. Where other celebrities in similar situations might have issued carefully worded denials drafted by publicists and approved by lawyers, 50 Cent seemed to operate on instinct, or at least seemed to want the world to believe that he was operating on instinct. Whether it was genuine emotional reaction or carefully calibrated performance was itself a subject of debate among observers who had spent years studying how he managed controversy. Some believed he was genuinely angry and simply responding the way he always responded, directly, without apology. Others believed that every word, every capitalization, every pointed reference was considered, deliberate, and designed to achieve a specific effect in the public conversation.
Diddy, however, took the opposite route with a consistency that became one of the defining features of the entire saga. Rather than stepping into the center of the storm and defending himself in real time, rather than meeting fire with fire or engaging with the conversation that was consuming the internet hour after hour, he stayed composed and noticeably quiet while the controversy continued to build around him with increasing intensity. That silence did not go unnoticed. If anything, it became one of the most discussed aspects of the entire story, generating its own headlines, its own theories, and its own audience of observers who found his restraint more fascinating and more revealing than anything he might actually have said. In fact, for many observers, his refusal to engage only made the situation feel even more compelling and more weighted with significance. When a public figure known for influence, control, and a carefully crafted image built across 30 years in the public eye chooses not to speak during a major scandal, people begin to wonder what is happening behind the scenes. They begin asking questions that no official statement has yet answered. They begin constructing narratives that fill the space where a response should have been. And those constructed narratives, built from imagination and partial information, have a way of becoming more vivid and more convincing than reality, simply because nobody is there to correct them.
The psychology of celebrity silence in a crisis is a well-documented phenomenon. Publicists and communication strategists have written about it. Law professors have analyzed its implications. Journalists have written entire essays about what it means when someone with power says nothing in a moment when the world expects them to speak. And in this case, Diddy's silence was not just a background detail. It was a central character in the story, one that audiences could not stop analyzing and debating.
Can silence save Diddy? He's vanished. No interviews, no comments. Not a word. Behind the scenes, his legal and PR teams are locking it all down because anything he says could blow up everything. But to the public, silence looks like guilt. Every headline, every whisper, the pressure's building.
Every day he remained quiet added another chapter to a story that only he could end, and he showed no sign of being ready to end it. For years, Diddy has been recognized not only as a major name in entertainment, but also as someone deeply focused on protecting his image and making careful, deliberate, strategic business moves that reflect the thinking of someone who understands that reputation is infrastructure. You build it over time, you protect it aggressively, you do not sacrifice it impulsively, no matter what the provocation. Because of that long-standing and well-documented reputation, his decision to stay calm and composed in the face of escalating public pressure appeared anything but accidental to those who knew him or knew his history with crisis.
Instead of reacting emotionally or adding fuel to the public conversation that was already raging without his participation, he seemed determined to let events play out without giving the story more energy from his side. To those watching closely, it read like the work of someone who had navigated crisis before, who had learned through experience that the instinct to defend yourself publicly is often the wrong instinct, and who had surrounded himself with advisors sophisticated enough to reinforce that lesson even when the pressure to respond became almost overwhelming. There is a particular kind of discipline required to stay silent when millions of people are demanding you speak. Diddy, whatever else was being said about him, appeared to possess that discipline. Reports and industry chatter suggested there may have been a very specific strategic reason for that restraint, one that went beyond general communications philosophy. According to speculation surrounding the situation and accounts from people described as being adjacent to his inner circle, people close to Diddy had urged him emphatically to remain patient and avoid rushing into public statements before having a complete and verified understanding of what was unfolding privately, legally, and reputationally. The advice, reportedly, was shaped by legal considerations as much as public relations thinking, because in situations where potential legal exposure exists, public statements can create problems that are far more difficult to resolve than the reputational damage caused by silence.
In moments like this, one wrong comment can make matters significantly worse in ways that are not always immediately visible.
Some of these parties aren't just parties, they're tests. The silence around Diddy wasn't just loyalty, it was fear. The kind of fear that keeps people in line. The kind that makes millionaires stay silent because they know money doesn't protect you from power. By now, people had stopped asking if she was telling the truth. They started asking who else knew.
A casual denial that turns out to be inaccurate creates a credibility problem. A confident assertion that is later contradicted by emerging evidence creates a narrative of deception. Even a statement that is technically accurate can be framed in ways that make it appear evasive or dishonest if the underlying facts are more complicated than the statement acknowledges. Those risks are real, and they are the kind of risks that serious legal and communications teams spend considerable time analyzing before advising their clients to say anything at all. People closest to Diddy apparently understood all of that. According to the accounts circulating in industry circles, the advice was consistent and clear. Say nothing publicly until the full picture is understood. Wait for the story to develop before deciding how to respond. Let the narrative evolve. Observe where it goes, and then respond strategically from a position of information rather than reacting defensively from a position of surprise. In theory, it was sound advice. In practice, it meant that the story continued to grow without any counter-narrative from the person most directly affected by it.
Even so, that quiet approach did not convince everyone that nothing was happening behind the curtain, and it certainly did not quiet the conversation that was growing louder by the day. Many believed, and many industry insiders suggested, that his team was already working carefully and aggressively in the background, considering ways to contain the fallout and prepare for whatever direction the scandal might take over the coming weeks and months. Crisis management at this level is rarely visible to the public, but that does not mean it is not happening. Quite the opposite. The most sophisticated crisis management is precisely the kind that leaves no visible trace, that works invisibly to reshape narratives, neutralize sources, and prepare legal and communication strategies for every foreseeable scenario.
We're losing.
Netflix releasing never-before-seen video of Sean Diddy Combs filmed just days before his arrest on charges of sex trafficking and racketeering in 2024. The footage is part of a 4-part docuseries, Sean Combs: The Reckoning, premiering Tuesday.
How did you get that footage of Diddy?
I figured most journalists would not disclose their sources.
Does he know y'all have this?
The apparatus around a celebrity of Diddy's stature is significant. Lawyers, publicists, communication strategists, image consultants, business managers whose own financial interests are tied to his continued reputation. All of those people had strong reasons to be working hard behind the scenes, even while the public face of the situation was silence. While no clear public response came from Diddy at that stage, and while the camera showed only a man going about his life with apparent composure, plenty of experienced observers suspected that beneath that surface, a significant effort was already underway to manage what was becoming an increasingly serious situation. That contrast, one figure responding with visible, combustible intensity that fed the media cycle, the other choosing silence and calculated strategic patience,
became one of the most fascinating dynamics of the entire controversy. It turned a major headline into something even bigger and more intellectually engaging. A waiting game filled with tension, unanswered questions, competing interpretations, and growing curiosity about what would happen next. Audiences were not just following a scandal. They were watching two very different approaches to crisis play out in real time, side by side, in the most public arena imaginable. And neither approach seemed to be making the story shrink or the pressure diminish. The contrast itself became a kind of media story, analyzed and debated by commentators who found it instructive, regardless of what they believed about the underlying scandal. What does it say about a person that they respond to accusation with aggression? What does it say about a person that they respond to accusation with silence? Which strategy is smarter? Which reveals more about the character of the person employing it? Those questions were being asked in entertainment blogs, podcast conversations, and social media threads by people who had no particular interest in either figure, but found the study of their responses genuinely illuminating.
Instead of easing the pressure on any of the parties involved, Diddy's decision to say nothing made the entire situation feel even more significant and even more deserving of continued attention. His silence didn't slow the story down. It didn't allow interest to naturally dissipate the way it sometimes does when a scandal fails to generate new material.
Disappear from radio, disappear from the press, disappear from relevance. Doing told the jury. When someone like that is angry, it's not just about what he'll do to you. It's about what he can make other people do to you. That's power, not the kind with security guards or NDAs. The kind where people silence themselves before you even ask.
If anything, it pushed public interest into overdrive because silence from someone who has everything to gain from speaking creates its own irresistible mystery. It gave people even more reason to wonder what might be happening out of view, in the meetings that no camera was invited to, in the conversations that no journalist was able to access. A vacuum always gets filled. That is one of the fundamental truths of the modern media environment. When public figures refuse to speak, the internet fills in the blanks with speculation, theory, imagination, and narrative construction that is sometimes more compelling than the truth precisely because it is unconstrained by facts. Once that process begins, once millions of curious, opinionated, and digitally connected people decide that a story is worth their attention, it is nearly impossible to reverse. The story takes on its own momentum, its own logic, its own life. And in this case, that life was vigorous, relentless, and showed no sign of natural exhaustion. Before long, the media machine kicked into full force in a way that suggested this was not a story the industry considered temporary or peripheral. Reporters started digging with genuine resource commitment, assigning teams rather than individual journalists to cover different angles. Entertainment analysts began picking apart every new development with surgical focus, bringing the kind of detailed biographical and professional knowledge that turns raw speculation into something that at least resembles context. Bloggers chased every whisper, publishing updates sometimes hours apart, each one claiming to move the story forward, even when the actual information content was minimal. Paparazzi watched closely for anything that looked even slightly unusual, understanding that in a story like this, any deviation from routine could become the detail that unlocks a new chapter. What had started as a rumor quickly turned into a full-scale hunt for answers, with everyone trying to find the one detail that could explain the truth behind the alleged footage. The story had become its own ecosystem, self-sustaining and constantly growing, feeding on the contributions of millions of participants who were simultaneously audience and content creators, consuming the narrative and adding to it with every comment, every share, and every theory they introduced into the conversation.
Soon, nothing connected to the situation escaped scrutiny. No matter how tangential or apparently innocent, a public outing became a possible clue. If someone was seen somewhere unexpected, the question immediately arose, why there? Why now? A social media upload that might once have been treated as routine promotional activity was treated like a coded message, parsed for hidden meaning by thousands of people who were convinced that nothing in this story was coincidental. Even anonymous tips and supposed insider claims, the kind that arrived without attribution, without verification, and without any mechanism for accountability, were picked apart as if they might unlock the entire mystery. The more people searched, the more the intrigue grew, and the story only became more difficult to ignore and more difficult to step back from once you were engaged with it. Once the post appeared, the specific post that seemed to shift the entire story into a new phase, the reaction online was immediate and overwhelming. It spread across platforms almost instantly, pulled along by the enormous currents of an internet that had already been primed for weeks to receive exactly this kind of development. Fans, journalists, and entertainment figures who had been watching from a distance suddenly found themselves pulled into direct engagement because what the post suggested was too significant and too specific to process passively. Within hours, the internet was flooded with reactions, debates, and non-stop speculation that drowned out almost every other entertainment story of the day. Questions piled up with a speed that made it impossible to answer any of them before the next one arrived. Was the rumored footage genuine, or was the entire thing built on whispers, assumptions, and the kind of collaborative fiction that the internet produces when it decides to believe something badly enough? If something did exist, what exactly could it show? Who was in it? When was it created? Under what circumstances? Who had it? Who had the power to release it? And what would motivate them to do so? More importantly, could it expose deeply private details involving celebrities with enormous influence and carefully protected public images, people whose lawyers were equipped to pursue legal action in multiple jurisdictions simultaneously, and whose resources made them formidable opponents in any court of law? Those questions kept people watching, posting, and guessing through every hour of every day, with no sign that answers were forthcoming from anyone in a position to provide them authoritatively. As the noise grew louder and the speculation more elaborate, one detail stood out more than anything else, hovering over every conversation like an unanswered challenge. Neither 50 Cent nor Diddy stepped forward to address the situation directly and publicly. No clarification, no denial that was official and attributable to them personally, no attempt to quiet the rumors by engaging with them or dismissing them through the normal channels that celebrities in crisis typically use. That complete lack of official response from the central figures created an even heavier cloud of uncertainty, turning an already dramatic story into something that felt even more suspenseful, more weighted, more deserving of the extraordinary attention it was receiving. Silence from two of the most vocal, media-savvy, communication-sophisticated names in entertainment was not a small or insignificant thing. It was the kind of absence that speaks volumes to anyone paying attention. To understand why Vivica A. Fox may have taken such a bold and public step at this particular moment in a story this large and this loaded, many people began revisiting her long and complicated past with 50 Cent. Their relationship was never quiet, private, or simple. From the very beginning, it played out in public view. And that quality, its visibility, its accessibility to media interest, made it irresistible to the entertainment press and to audiences who had developed a genuine investment in the story of these two figures together.
50 Cent was the love of my life. He was the one that, dang, kind of blew that one. Happens. I was young, had been used to taking care of myself. You know, 50 wanted me to be his princess, you know, and I didn't get it. I didn't get it, so, you know, my fault. But I am so glad to report to everybody that there is peace. We used to go at it publicly. Trust we did.
Every development drew coverage. Every shift in the dynamic between them became part of a larger narrative that expanded over time, accumulating context and emotional weight with each passing year. What made their connection so memorable and so enduring in public consciousness was how often it seemed to shift between affection, tension, and headline-making conflict without ever fully settling into one mode. Their romance became the kind of celebrity story that audiences followed closely because it rarely stayed calm for long enough to become boring. Every development seemed to bring a new wave of attention, and their personal history became part of a larger public narrative that lingered long after the relationship itself had ended.
long after both of them had moved on to other relationships and other phases of their careers and their lives. Even years later, the mere mention of either name in the same sentence was enough to reignite interest and remind people of a chapter in both their lives that had never been fully closed.
Over time, that history gave observers plenty to analyze and plenty to project onto any new development that involved either of them. Because their relationship had already been marked by visible ups and downs that were documented in real time by a media industry eager to cover them, any new move involving either figure was almost guaranteed to spark fresh theories about underlying motives, unresolved feelings, and the complicated ways in which personal history shapes professional behavior. In a moment already packed with mystery and online frenzy, Vivica A. Fox's involvement didn't just add another name to the story, it added a whole additional narrative dimension, a backstory rich with emotional texture that made the situation feel more explosive, more personal, and more human than it had before her name appeared. That is why her actions drew such immediate and intense interest. People weren't just reacting to the post itself, analyzing its content in isolation and evaluating it on its own terms. They were also reading it through the lens of everything that had come before, interpreting each element in light of years of documented history between her and 50 Cent. Her connection to him gave the moment extra weight that a similar post from anyone else would not have carried. And for many watching from the outside, it raised the possibility that there could be more behind the scenes than the public had ever been allowed to see. Layers of history, grievance, loyalty, and emotion that had been building for years, and that this controversy had finally brought to the surface. With Diddy staying quiet, 50 Cent offering no official explanation, and old relationship history suddenly becoming powerfully relevant again, the entire situation took on a life of its own that no single person could manage or direct. Speculation fed more speculation in a feedback loop that had no obvious exit. Every unanswered question generated several more. Every half answer created new ambiguity. What might have been dismissed as another fleeting celebrity rumor, the kind that burns hot for a day or two and then disappears, instead became a growing mystery that the internet could not stop talking about, analyzing, and investing in emotionally. The cycle was self-reinforcing, and no one involved in the center of it seemed ready or willing or able to break it. Their relationship had always drawn attention, marked by emotional highs that made for irresistible celebrity content, sudden splits that generated waves of sympathetic coverage, and short-lived reunions that gave gossip outlets and fans plenty to dissect and debate with genuine enthusiasm. The specific contours of their history had been documented extensively enough that journalists covering the current story had rich archives to draw from, allowing them to contextualize new developments with a long and complicated narrative that their audiences already had some familiarity with. That contextual richness made every new development feel more significant because it was not arriving in a vacuum. It was arriving with decades of backstory attached. With that kind of complicated past as the foundation, it did not take long for people to start connecting old friction to the scandal now taking over headlines and dominating the entertainment conversation. The more the story spread, the more questions surfaced about whether unresolved issues between Vivica A. Fox and 50 Cent might somehow be playing a role behind the scenes, shaping decisions that were playing out on a very public stage in ways that neither party may have fully anticipated. History has a way of asserting itself in unexpected moments, and this situation was quickly becoming a case study in how the past never disappears. It simply waits for the right conditions to resurface. Recent interview appearances by Vivica A. Fox only added more fuel to that idea, providing journalists and commentators with concrete material to work with rather than pure speculation. In those conversations, she seemed to suggest that her past with 50 Cent was not entirely settled, as if certain feelings and unfinished moments were still lingering beneath the surface of an otherwise professional exterior, waiting for a moment when they could be acknowledged. Her language was careful but pointed. She did not make accusations. She did not provide specific details, but the implication was unmistakable to audiences who had been following the story and who were attuned to the particular way in which celebrity figures communicate through strategic ambiguity in public settings. Those remarks immediately caught the attention of viewers, entertainment reporters, and online commentators who had already been primed by weeks of coverage to treat anything connected to the scandal as potentially significant. Many began trying to decode what she really meant and what, if anything, she might be prepared to do or say next.
50 Cent is suing Vivica Fox after she claimed he's been hiding secret affairs with men. It all started when 50 dissed Empire for too much gay stuff, and Vivica fired back, hinting at his own hidden flings, especially with Soulja Boy. 50 posted a throwback clip of him flirting with Vivica, calling it his biggest regret. Now, 50's fighting back legally to protect his rep as the ultimate ladies' man.
The analysis of her word choices, her tone, her body language in interview clips, and even the specific questions she chose to answer or deflect became its own cottage industry of commentary, with people constructing elaborate interpretations from fragments of evidence that might, under other circumstances, have been treated as unremarkable. Soon, speculation about her motives moved in several directions at once, pulling the conversation into territory that was simultaneously more personal and more abstract. Some wondered whether the rumored release of the alleged footage had anything to do with lingering bitterness from a relationship that had ended badly and never fully found the kind of closure that allows people to move forward without looking back. Others believed it could have been tied to a search for personal resolution after years spent watching someone she once cared for dominate the headlines for other reasons, while her own career trajectory took different turns. A different group saw it as a possible attempt to step back into the spotlight at the center of a major entertainment storm, reclaiming a form of cultural relevance during a moment when the world was already watching and the audience for anything connected to the story was enormous. And still others believed it was something more calculated, more strategic, tied to professional motivations that had nothing to do with personal history at all.
None of those theories were confirmed. None of them could be confirmed on the available evidence. But the mystery around her motives only made the entire situation even more captivating to follow, even more deserving of the extraordinary attention it was receiving. Because human motivation is always more interesting than simple event sequencing. Why someone does something is almost always a more compelling story than what they did, and in this case, the why remained genuinely, frustratingly opaque. As public curiosity grew, and the story continued generating new material without showing any signs of resolution, Vivica A. Fox found herself pulled deeper into the center of the conversation, whether she had fully intended that outcome or not. Her name became attached to nearly every new round of online discussion, and that attachment transformed her into one of the most closely watched and debated figures in the unfolding drama. Someone whose every public appearance and statement was treated as potentially revelatory. Every comment she made, every interview clip that circulated, and every social media reaction she generated seemed to spark a fresh wave of analysis from people who were already deeply invested in figuring out where all of this was heading and what her specific role in it ultimately was. At the same time, Diddy remained noticeably quiet in public, offering no clear statement to slow the momentum of the story, no anchor for the narrative, no official perspective that journalists and commentators could quote, reference, or argue against. That silence created even more room for rumors to grow unchecked by anything approaching official reality. Without an authoritative counter-narrative to push back against the theories multiplying across the internet, audiences were left to rely on fragments, second-hand accounts, anonymous sourcing, and pure speculation. That combination only made the controversy feel larger and more uncontrollable by the day. A story that had escaped the gravitational pull of any single person's ability to manage it. Eventually, 50 Cent stepped in and made himself heard, and his response came in a style that closely matched the blunt, fearless, confrontational image he has spent his entire career constructing and maintaining. Rather than staying quiet like Diddy, rather than allowing the conversation to continue without his voice in it, he turned to Instagram, his platform of choice for statements that he wants to land with immediate, unfiltered impact, and reportedly shared a string of intense posts rejecting the claims outright with the kind of directness that his audience had come to expect from him. According to reports, he strongly denied that any such footage even existed, pushing back hard against the rumors that had been spreading across entertainment circles with growing speed and conviction. His language was unambiguous. His tone left no room for misinterpretation. He was angry, or performing anger with extraordinary conviction, and he wanted the world to know it. Even though those posts did not stay up for long, they were removed with a speed that itself generated new questions about why they had been posted in the first place and why they were subsequently deleted. Their impact was immediate and lasting in ways that no deletion could undo.
Screenshots had already been captured within minutes of the original posts appearing, circulated by accounts who understood that documentation of volatile celebrity content is a valuable commodity in the attention economy. Those screenshots moved from account to account at incredible speed across every major platform, generating waves of engagement that dwarfed what the original posts might have achieved if they had simply stayed up and been allowed to run their natural course. Once that happened, the situation took on a new life online entirely, one that was arguably more intense and more consequential than anything that had come before it. Deleted posts have a particular power in the current media environment that published posts do not. When something disappears, the question of why it disappears becomes as significant as the content itself. The deletion becomes the story. The act of removal transforms a statement into a mystery, and mysteries are far more engaging than declarations. The internet does not forget, and it does not forgive erasure. In this case, the deleted posts breathe new life into a story that might otherwise have reached a natural plateau, pushing public interest to heights that surprised even the most seasoned entertainment observers.
Vivica Fox.
Vivica, what would it take for you and 50 Cent to...
Dating 50 Cent, was difficult. He is absolutely the love of my life because I really, really cared for him and I loved him very, very much.
She goes to go do some publicity for it. What do you say about 50 Cent saying Empire ratings are going down because it's gay?
As the screenshots continued spreading across social media in waves that showed no sign of subsiding, the argument only became louder, more polarized, and more resistant to any kind of resolution. Fans began picking sides with a fervor that suggested this story had touched something beyond ordinary celebrity gossip, that it had activated genuine loyalties, genuine frustrations, and genuine convictions about the people involved, and about broader questions of power, accountability, and truth in the entertainment industry. Media personalities weighed in with sharp, confident opinions that attracted enormous engagement. Entertainment insiders added their own interpretations and claimed their own exclusive perspectives. Every development kept the topic active across platforms and discussion shows around the clock without any indication that the audience's appetite was diminishing. Instead of calming the controversy, 50 Cent's response appeared to energize it in ways that suggested his decision to engage was either strategically miscalculated or strategically brilliant, depending entirely on what outcome he had been trying to achieve. By speaking loudly and then falling silent, by posting and then deleting, he had guaranteed the conversation would not fade quietly or without consequence. He had given the story new material, new questions, and a new chapter to analyze, all without providing any actual clarity about the underlying situation. It was a masterclass in keeping attention without providing information, though whether that had been his intention was itself impossible to know. What made the story especially compelling to follow, and what gave it staying power well beyond the typical lifespan of an entertainment scandal, was the collision of multiple powerful narrative elements happening simultaneously and interacting with one another in ways that kept producing new story angles. On one side, there was a past romantic relationship filled with emotional baggage, documented conflict, and years of tabloid interest from an audience that had followed every chapter. On another, there was one of the most powerful figures in music choosing not to speak publicly while the noise around him intensified with every passing hour, his silence becoming a story in its own right. And in the middle of it all stood 50 Cent, responding in a way that guaranteed the conversation would not fade quietly, posting, deleting, denying, and withdrawing in a sequence that generated more questions than it answered. With so many layers and so few confirmed details, the drama only grew more intense with each passing day, as each new development seemed to pull more people in rather than move the story toward any kind of resolution. The controversy had escaped the control of anyone who might theoretically have been able to close it, and it was now operating according to its own internal logic, driven by the enormous combined energy of millions of invested observers who had no intention of letting it go. The backlash to various elements of the story was immediate, and it spread fast across every platform where entertainment culture lives. Within moments of each new development, the internet had turned the situation into a full-scale battleground, with fans and followers taking hard positions on both sides of multiple arguments simultaneously. One group rushed to defend 50 Cent,
insisting that Vivica A. Fox may have overstated what happened, or possibly chosen this particular moment to speak for reasons tied more to personal grievance, unresolved history, or a desire for visibility than to genuine concern about accountability or truth. To them, the entire story looked less like a serious revelation warranting the extraordinary attention it was receiving, and more like another celebrity dispute that had been inflated far beyond its original spark by a media ecosystem with an insatiable appetite for exactly this kind of conflict. Elsewhere, a very different conversation was gaining momentum with equal intensity, focused not on the personalities of the individuals involved, but on the larger questions the story was raising about power, privacy, and accountability in the entertainment industry. Plenty of people began wondering what could happen next if the alleged footage ever surfaced publicly, and those questions quickly shifted from simple gossip to broader speculation about the possible legal, professional, and reputational consequences for everyone involved. That uncertainty only fueled the chaos further, pushing even more people to weigh in with their own theories, interpretations, and increasingly elaborate predictions about where the story was heading and how it would ultimately be resolved or fail to be resolved.
Across social media, the reaction became impossible to ignore and nearly impossible to escape unless you actively curated your feed to avoid it. Comment sections, discussion threads, and opinion columns were packed with non-stop arguments, detailed breakdowns of the available evidence, and passionate opinion pieces as users picked apart every comment, every deleted post, and every rumored piece of information tied to the controversy. Nothing was considered too small to examine or too peripheral to analyze. A missing post became a clue. A vague statement became a headline. A gesture captured by a paparazzi camera became material for behavioral analysis. Even silence, prolonged and conspicuous, started to look meaningful to people already deeply invested in the drama and determined to find the hidden truth beneath the layers of performance, strategy, and carefully maintained public image. Before long, the story had grown beyond the names at the center of it, becoming a broader conversation about the entertainment industry itself, about how it produces and protects celebrity power, about where the limits of that protection lie, and about what happens when the machinery of fame turns against the people it once elevated. Entertainment insiders and media personalities began treating the moment as something larger than a personal clash between well-known figures with a complicated history. What started as a heated exchange opened the door to genuinely important discussions about how celebrity privacy functions in a world where almost nothing stays private for long, where digital tools allow documentation of almost any moment, and where the economic incentives to share private information are often stronger than the legal deterrents against it.
Public image, once carefully managed through publicists and strategic appearances, and a media ecosystem that largely cooperated with the maintenance of celebrity mythology, now seems far more fragile in an environment where every rumor can be amplified to millions in a matter of seconds, where verification is optional, and where the emotional appeal of a story often matters more to audiences than its factual accuracy. The rules that govern celebrity reputation management for decades have been fundamentally altered by technological change, and the people who built their careers under the old rules are now navigating a landscape that those rules were never designed to address. Another issue also came sharply into focus as the story developed. Reputation in the digital age can be shaped just as much by public reaction as by confirmed, verified information. A story that spreads widely enough becomes its own form of evidence in the court of public opinion, regardless of whether it is ever legally adjudicated or factually established. That reality has changed the rules for everyone operating at the intersection of celebrity, media, and public attention. Online narratives move with terrifying speed, and once they take hold in the cultural conversation, they can become incredibly difficult to slow down, correct, or dislodge. A single accusation, a short clip, or an ambiguous post shared by the right account at the right moment can shift public opinion almost overnight. Whether the full story is known or not, whether the accusation is accurate or not, whether the clip has been taken out of context or not. The systems for correcting misinformation at scale have not kept pace with the systems for spreading it. That asymmetry benefits rumors and punishes nuance. It creates environments where the loudest, most dramatic version of a story tends to dominate regardless of its accuracy. and where the people with the most to lose from false narratives often have the least ability to counter them effectively. Many observers pointed to the broader power shift happening across the entertainment industry, one that the current situation both reflected and accelerated. Social media no longer functions as simply a tool for promotion and fan interaction, as it was initially positioned and initially used by the celebrities who adopted it earliest. In many cases, it has become a force powerful enough to influence careers, control headlines, pressure public figures into respond before they are legally or strategically prepared to do so, and create accountability mechanisms that exist entirely outside the traditional systems of law, journalism, and institutional governance that societies have developed over centuries to manage disputes and determine truth. Rumors spread faster than traditional reporting can verify or contextualize them. Viral posts often reach enormous audiences before fact-checkers have time to evaluate their claims. Perception, fairly or unfairly, can begin to carry the same weight as proof in the eyes of a public that is hungry for answers, skeptical of official narratives, and often impatient with the slow, careful processes through which factual accuracy is established. That is the environment these figures found themselves navigating, and it was not a forgiving or a patient one.
Can silence save Diddy? He's vanished. No interviews, no comments, not a word. Behind the scenes, his legal and PR teams are locking it all down because anything he says could blow up everything. But to the public, silence looks like guilt. Every headline, every whisper, the pressure's building.
That is part of what made this situation feel so explosive and so genuinely impossible to contain once it reached a certain velocity. It was not only about who said what, or what footage may or may not have existed, or what the personal and professional history between the central figures actually meant. It was also about how quickly the internet can transform a private dispute into a public spectacle, then push it into something much bigger, louder, and more consequential than anyone originally anticipated, reaching into corners of the culture that none of the participants could have predicted or prepared for. Once that transformation happens, once a private situation becomes a public story of sufficient scale, everyone connected to the story becomes part of a larger narrative that they may no longer be able to control. Regardless of how many lawyers they employ, how many communication strategists they consult, or how carefully they manage their public behavior, the story takes on its own authority, its own constituency, and its own momentum that operates independently of the wishes or intentions of the people at its center. While the uproar kept spreading and the media cycle continued churning out new angles with relentless consistency, Diddy remained strikingly quiet, in a way that the story simply could not absorb or move past. No dramatic response, no public back and forth that would give journalists something concrete to report. No carefully worded statement designed to calm the waters without creating new legal vulnerabilities. Just a carefully maintained silence that made the situation feel even more mysterious and more significant than it might otherwise have appeared, because silence in this context was not nothing. It was an active choice made by someone with the resources to speak and the sophistication to understand the consequences of every possible response. His absence from the conversation was as loud, in its own way, as anything 50 Cent had posted or deleted. For someone known for protecting his image and making deliberate, calculated business moves across decades at the top of an industry that rewards image above almost everything else, that reaction seemed anything but accidental or passive. Instead of stepping into the spotlight and addressing the noise head-on in the way that audiences might have expected from someone of his visibility and his historical willingness to engage publicly on matters affecting his reputation, the music mogul appeared committed to keeping his distance while the story developed around him at full speed, at full volume, and with no obvious natural endpoint. To many observers, it looked like a calculated choice made by someone with experience navigating dangerous media moments, someone who had learned that rushing in rarely ends well, and that the first instinct, to defend yourself, to correct the record, to push back against what feels unjust, is often precisely the wrong instinct in moments when legal considerations are paramount. Reports and industry chatter consistently suggested the same underlying explanation. According to those close to the situation and willing to speak in terms that could be reported without direct attribution, people in Diddy's inner circle urged him not to react too quickly, too emotionally, or too publicly in a situation with this many dimensions. The advice reportedly was firm and consistently applied. Stay patient.
Avoid emotional statements that could be taken out of context or used against him in proceedings he cannot yet fully anticipate. And make sure the full picture was clearly understood before saying anything publicly that might be weaponized by parties with interests opposed to his own. In a moment already packed with speculation and unverified claims arriving from multiple directions simultaneously, one wrong comment could have made the chaos significantly worse and given the story an entirely new chapter to run with, one in which he himself had handed his critics the material they needed. Still, silence in a situation like this rarely settles anything in the way that those advising it might hope. If anything, prolonged silence in a high-visibility scandal often has precisely the opposite effect from the one intended. Rather than allowing the story to exhaust itself, it can provide the story with the very oxygen it needs to keep burning. Because an unanswered accusation is, for many observers, an accusation that cannot be answered. Away from the cameras, in the social media feeds, and the non-stop coverage, many believed that his team was already working through possible responses with the urgency the situation demanded, discussing ways to contain any fallout, preparing legal and communication strategies for multiple scenarios, and carefully measuring what this controversy might mean for both his personal name and the larger business empire built over decades of hard work, strategic partnerships, and cultural influence. Even without an official statement visible to the public, the sense that serious, high-stakes conversations were happening behind closed doors only added yet another layer to the already dense and growing intrigue. The mystery of what was being planned, prepared, or considered in private became as compelling to many observers as the mystery of what was actually in the alleged footage. Both were unknowns. Both invited speculation. And both served to keep the story alive and growing in the absence of anything definitive from the people who actually knew the answers. Rather than cooling the story down the way strategic silence is theoretically supposed to, the lack of public comment seemed to pour even more energy into it, accelerating rather than decelerating a narrative that was already moving fast. Curiosity exploded across every platform and media channel simultaneously. Reporters pushed harder and dug deeper, going back to sources they had not contacted in years, revisiting old stories for connections they might previously have missed, and pursuing new angles with the kind of intensity that a genuinely significant story deserves. Entertainment analysts started dissecting every angle they could find, bringing in experts on crisis communications, media law, and celebrity culture to contextualize developments that resisted simple interpretation. Bloggers chased every rumor, however thin its evidential basis, understanding that in the attention economy, being first matters more than being definitive. Photographers and camera crews watched for any expression, gesture, or unexpected appearance that might offer a clue about what was actually happening in the private lives and private conversations of the people at the center of the story. The search for answers became relentless, fueled by an audience that showed no signs of losing interest, and a media ecosystem that had strong financial incentives to keep feeding that interest as long as it existed.
Soon, nothing connected to Diddy escaped scrutiny, no matter how ordinary or insignificant it might have appeared under other circumstances and in a different moment. A public sighting was no longer just a sighting, it was potential evidence of a state of mind, a strategic positioning, a signal of confidence or distress that could be read in multiple ways. A social media update was no longer just a post, it was a deliberate communication from someone who was choosing every word, knowing that it would be analyzed for implications that went beyond its surface meaning. Even vague claims from unnamed insiders with questionable access and uncertain credibility suddenly became headline material for outlets desperate to keep the story alive and moving forward. Every tiny detail was picked apart, examined from multiple angles, and interpreted as if it might unlock the truth behind what was allegedly happening, the truth behind the footage, the truth behind the relationships, the truth behind the strategies being pursued in private by people with enormous resources and strong motivations to control the outcome. The mystery only seemed to deepen with each passing day, feeding the very appetite it had created, generating new questions with every partial answer it offered, and new theories with every piece of evidence that emerged. As the days stretched into weeks, the attention didn't fade the way these stories sometimes do when the underlying situation fails to produce new material. It intensified in a manner that surprised even seasoned observers of celebrity media cycles. What had started as a rumor-driven controversy rooted in whispers and secondhand accounts was now turning into a full-scale media storm with a momentum that felt genuinely difficult to contain. And the pressure around it felt harder and harder to manage with every passing hour. Coverage became louder, faster, and far more dramatic in its framing, its language, and its willingness to present speculation as if it carried the weight of established fact. Tabloids seized the moment with eye-catching front pages and increasingly sensational stories that pushed the boundaries between journalism and narrative construction. One outlet would hint at hidden agendas no one could verify. Another would push an explosive theory built on anonymous sourcing that offered no mechanism for the reader to evaluate its reliability. Some reports leaned so heavily into conjecture that the distinction between verified information and pure rumor became genuinely difficult to identify for anyone trying to follow the story carefully. In that environment, even the smallest update could be transformed into something massive, and audiences who had already invested emotionally in the story and formed strong opinions about the people involved were more than willing to believe the next dramatic development, whatever it turned out to be.
That was part of what made the situation so combustible and so difficult to diffuse once it had reached a certain scale. The public was not just reacting to confirmed facts, because confirmed facts remained scarce. They were reacting to a swirl of headlines, whispers, theories, and half-formed narratives that kept feeding off one another in a self-reinforcing loop of attention and engagement that seemed to have no natural ceiling. Each new supposed development created another wave of discussion, and each wave brought even more questions than answers, keeping the cycle alive, and the audience deeply engaged in a story that showed no signs of reaching its conclusion through any natural process. Through all of it, Diddy's decision to remain publicly reserved continued to stand at the center of the narrative like a silent character in a play where everyone else was speaking at full volume. To some, his restraint looked smart, strategic, and characteristic of someone who understood the rules of the game well enough to play them even under extreme pressure. To others, it made the situation feel even more suspicious, as if the quietest person in the room was also the one with the most to hide, the most to lose from any kind of public engagement, and the strongest reasons to stay behind the protection of legal counsel and strategic silence. Either way, the effect was undeniable and impossible to argue with. The longer the silence lasted, the bigger the mystery became. The bigger the mystery became, the more attention it attracted. The more attention it attracted, the more the spotlight burned with an intensity that showed no sign of dimming, no sign of finding its natural level, and no sign of releasing the story it had decided to consume. By that point, the controversy had taken on a life completely independent of anyone's intentions, strategies, or original contributions to the story. What happened behind closed doors mattered, of course, because the facts of the situation were real and would eventually need to be addressed in one form or another. But perception had its own momentum now, and in the court of public opinion, perception and reality operate on very different timelines and very different standards of proof. Unanswered questions can become just as powerful as actual statements. Unverified theories can carry as much weight as testimony from people who were present, and in this case, every moment without clarity only made the spotlight burn brighter, hotter, and more relentless than before, consuming everything in the story's orbit and showing no mercy to anyone unlucky enough to find themselves connected to it. Every new allegation, even the ones that the most charitable observer would immediately identify as speculative or implausible, only seemed to intensify the curiosity rather than exhaust it. The story had trained its audience to expect escalation, and escalation was what continued to arrive, chapter after chapter, with no final page in sight. Instead of fading away under the weight of its own complexity or the public's eventual exhaustion, the story kept picking up momentum, drawing more attention online and sparking fresh arguments and deeper analyses across every corner of the internet that covered entertainment, culture, or celebrity. At the same time, paparazzi packed the areas around private residences,
music studios, upscale hotels, and business buildings tied to the developing drama with a consistency and a density that signaled industry-wide recognition that this was not a story that was going to disappear quietly. Camera crews and entertainment reporters stayed planted for long stretches, watching every entrance and every exit, waiting for the tiniest signal that something significant was about to happen or had just happened out of view. A brief glance in the wrong direction, an unplanned arrival at an unexpected hour, a visible expression of stress or anger or relief. Any of these could instantly become the next major headline and breathe new life into a story that was already consuming enormous amounts of media oxygen. Before long, the constant spotlight had turned the entire situation into one of the most heavily discussed sagas in entertainment in recent memory, a story that felt impossible to step back from once you were engaged with it. It was no longer just a celebrity rumor or an industry dispute between powerful figures with history between them. It had grown into a full-scale media obsession, with every update dissected for implications, every appearance analyzed for hidden meaning, and every silence treated as a statement waiting to be decoded by an audience that had become expert at finding significance in the smallest details.
Names like 50 Cent, Diddy, and Vivica A. Fox were suddenly everywhere and inescapable across every format in which entertainment culture lives. Television segments led with them night after night, anchored by hosts who understood that these names guaranteed ratings in a competitive media environment. Social media feeds kept recycling the story with new angles, new theories, and new material from users who had become deeply invested participants in an ongoing collective investigation. Podcast hosts debated it with the kind of genuine passion usually reserved for issues of broader social significance, because the story had come to feel to many people like it was about something larger than the individuals at its center. As the rumors became more intense and the theories more elaborate, public interest only deepened in ways that surprised even seasoned media observers who had seen many celebrity scandals come and go. People weren't just following the headlines anymore. They were actively trying to solve the mystery for themselves, piecing together fragments from interviews, social media posts, deleted content, and alleged insider accounts, as if they were working a case that demanded resolution, that had personal stakes, that mattered in ways that went beyond simple entertainment. The biggest question driving all of it remained exactly what it had always been from the very first day. Did the rumored footage actually exist? Or had the speculation expanded so dramatically that it had started to completely overshadow whatever the real story might actually be?
That uncertainty became the hook. It became the engine. It became the thing that prevented the story from reaching a natural endpoint and allowed it to continue generating energy and attention long past the point where most stories exhaust themselves. And it kept everyone watching, waiting, and wondering, not just about the footage, not just about the people involved, but about what a story like this says about the world that produces it, consumes it, and cannot look away from it, even when looking away might be the more dignified choice.